Chapter 2, The Last Grenadier. Never felt like he fit. Everyone else seemed to fit just fine, like everything made perfect sense, but it didn't make sense to him. He felt like an engine with a piston that misfired. All the other engines whizzed around, humming along, but he would sputter and rattle and run just a little bit off. It drove him crazy in high school, where everyone else did nothing and was okay with it. The whole world was out there full of people doing cool things, and everyone just stayed around their tiny town. Flat out refused to accept it. He started telling his parents he was sleeping over at a friend's house, and then he'd take the car and just drive. Drive west to Niagara Falls, or east to Syracuse, or south to Pennsylvania and back just to do it, just to do something. His senior year, they had a class trip to the state fair for a weekend. He tried to convince his dad to give him the money he'd spend on the class trip and instead let him go somewhere cool. But of course his dad said no, so ended up with all his classmates milling around the fairgrounds like cows. He eventually found himself on the dumbest ride ever, riding in a giant plastic log with three friends, inching along a track of water through ancient displays showing the history of New York State. His friends were going on about some hotel party in the works, but wasn't listening at all. Even when they spoke to him, he barely heard them. He'd hardly spoken all day, but finally, halfway through the ride, he spoke. "So I've been thinking," said. His friends stopped and looked at him. "I think we can agree that this ride sucks," he said. "In fact, I feel pretty confident saying that this entire state fair sucks. Also, I am aware that Jim purchased a squirt gun earlier today, and that squirt gun is in Jim's bag. Is that correct, Jim?" "Yes," his friend Jim said uncertainly. "When this log goes around the bend up ahead," said, "we are getting out." "Wait, we're doing what?" they all protested. "It's the middle of a ride." "Exactly," confirmed. "Out now." Then, as easy as that, stepped out of the plastic log. His friends followed, and suddenly their now empty log was floating away without them. "Hide!" commanded, darting behind a fake apple tree. They all scrambled to take cover in the dark interior of the ride just as the next log appeared. The four of them froze and watched from the shadows. The people inside the log didn't see them at all. Neither did the next one. Watched a few more logs go by before getting the timing down. Then he darted out, dunked the squirt gun into the water trench, and then hid again. "What are we doing?" Jim whispered. "Come on," replied. Then he scrambled up a small ladder that led up into the rafters. Quickly, they all followed, giggling nervously and tucking themselves into the dark corners above the ride. And from there, they spent the rest of the day squirting people in logs below and silently dying with laughter and delight, watching their reactions. Went to college at a state school on Lake Erie, and college was better. All those kids and no one watching them, but still, everyone just wandered from party to party, class to class. Would drive to Buffalo and go to the airport. There was a huge empty field that was right underneath the path of the planes. Would lay out prone in the stiff grass and gasp as the planes roared over him so loud it made him tremble. He was not going to sit there and wait for life to happen. Had wild blonde hair that puffed out in all directions like a young Einstein. He emitted a golden glow that radiated from him, and while no one could actually see it, they felt it. He had the sleek body of a runner. His nipples were permanently erect. Graduated college, and the plan was to move back to Rochester. A group of guys from college had invited him to go in on a house right off Park Avenue, which is where the bars were in Rochester. It was a sweet house, big and sprawling, and best of all, it was right on the route for the Park Ave Festival, which is basically the most exciting thing that happened every year in Rochester. 2 weeks later, the festival arrived. The whole street filled up with people drinking beer and doing their thing. It was fun, but after a couple of hours, Chris found himself sitting upstairs in his room, holding the last beer left from the case he'd bought. Something wasn't right. there it was, that out-of-sync feeling, that stupid misfire. He would attack it, push through it, get back out there, and dive into the party full force. But that didn't feel right. And suddenly that engine in his chest started to whir to life. He was not going to sit there and wait for life to happen. He jumped to his feet, rushed down to the kitchen, and got a plastic pitcher from the cabinet. Everyone called him to join the party, but he ignored them and rushed back upstairs. He ducked into his housemate's room and grabbed one of the fishing poles from his closet, then went upstairs onto the roof of the house. There was a crowd outside drinking and having fun on the sidewalk when suddenly a pitcher slowly descended from the sky. A sign was taped to the pitcher, reading, "Beer, please." Everyone looked up to see that the pitcher had been lowered from the roof on a fishing line. They screamed with delight and rushed to pour their beers into the empty pitcher. Then they cheered like maniacs as the pitcher was reeled back up. Soon the front of their house became the epicenter of the entire street festival. His housemates joined him on the roof with fishing poles of their own, and it turned into an unforgettable event. It was everyone's best Park Ave festival story for years to come. Hours later, the party had faded, and his housemates had all gone to bed, but stayed up on the roof. The sky was clear. It was a beautiful summer night in upstate New York. He smelled the sticky beer residue that was all over the roof, and he smiled. Something wasn't right. He chased his thoughts around, searching every angle for what was still bothering him. Like a bloodhound, he carefully sniffed every possibility, searching for the cause of the nagging feeling that was twisting in his guts. He was not going to wait around and wait for life to happen. That morning, each of his housemates woke up to find a letter pinned to their door. His parents found the same letter in their mailbox. Didn't have much of a plan, he told them in the letter, but life was way too short to wait for everything to fit just right. There was no time to lose. He apologized for any and all inconvenience, but he was not going to be living in Rochester. He was going to Los Angeles. And the letter was so titanically mighty that he couldn't possibly sign his old name. He had become something larger and more evolved. He signed the letter Super Guy. Super Guy had gone to California in high school on a trip with his family, and it was so different. It was bright and open. You could breathe the air. Super Guy's Uncle Carl lived out there, and for years had made it clear that Super Guy could take his spare room whenever he wanted. Carl also knew a producer at Disney, so Super Guy even had a lead on a job. So Super Guy was taking Carl up on his offer. He packed his car full of his books and clothes and camping gear, and he pointed it west. The drive was magic. Every mile forward, he seemed to get larger. Through the hills and the tight rows and rows of corn, then the great lonely plains bunching and unfolding, silent and bright. As the landscape expanded, so did the throbbing engine inside his chest. Each day he got up at dawn and blasted on until the sun started to set. Then he'd find a secluded spot and set up his tent. By the time he saw the Rocky Mountains, he felt like he was as tall as they were. He was going to find his people in Los Angeles. He was going to make it happen. He could imagine the life he was going to build, and it was beautiful. It was the opposite of everything that had bothered him his entire life. He was finally going to a place where he belonged, a place that was alive and moving in the same rhythm that he did. He'd planned to take 5 days to drive out there, but on the evening of the fourth day, he couldn't contain himself, and he kept going through the night, past Las Vegas, through the desert, and then he was in L.A. It was after midnight when he slid into the driveway. He found the house pitch dark, so he pulled out his sleeping bag, laid it out on the front deck, and went to sleep. His Uncle Carl woke him the next morning and welcomed him to California. But all of that momentum was hard to maintain. His Uncle Carl and his Aunt May were terrific, but they went to sleep by 9. They lived in a house out in the dusty hills, miles away from anything. Super Guy had no idea what to do with himself, but no way that was going to stop him. He tried joining a pickup basketball game at a park nearby, but he was awful at basketball. Halfway through the first game, they started calling him White Load. Halfway through the second game, a pass went through his hands and smashed him square in the face. Pinching his nose to stem the blood, Super Guy slinked back to his car and drove away. On a Friday night, he drove to UCLA and went to one of the bars near the campus. He sat there, drank 2 super expensive beers, and no one talked to him or even acknowledged he was there. His Aunt May hooked him up with a friend's son who agreed to let Super Guy join him and some friends when they went out. So that next weekend, Super Guy found himself stuffed into a car full of amped-up, puffy guys who were drenched in cologne and dressed like assholes. They went to a club called Bobby McGee's. An army of shellacked, swollen guys ringed the dance floor while gorgeous, polished girls hopped and swirled in clusters under the pulsing lights. Super Guy drank himself incoherent out of boredom and eventually fell asleep in an empty booth. He met some guys trying to make it as actors who invited him to play tennis, but it took 2 hours for them to even leave the apartment where they met. They chain-smoked and made mean comments about each other's headshots and reels, which they were apparently constantly updating. When they finally went to the tennis court, they warmed up for another hour before actually playing. Super Guy smelled like an ashtray when he drove home, feeling discouraged about the whole California thing. He finally broke down and tried something he swore he wouldn't do. Super Guy had played Dungeons and Dragons in high school and college, but he'd kept it on the down low, and he certainly hadn't planned to play out in L.A. No way was that the scene he was looking for. But he was lonely, so he figured he'd just dabble. He'd drop it as soon as he found the places that were really happening. He got the yellow pages, looked up comic book shops, and started calling. Hi, I'm wondering if you have some kind of gaming club? He'd ask. A few no's, a few maybes. But then he called a shop in Burbank called The Last Grenadier. Yeah, the Quest Club, they meet every Sunday at 11 and usually have multiple games going on in our back room. The Quest Club. It's exactly what you're looking for. So that Sunday at 10:45, he went through the regular store and into the back room filled with folding tables, folding chairs, and D&D dorks. The crowd was unmistakable. The ill-fitting T-shirts with bellies peeking out, the too-high pants with white socks and black sneakers, the sad, patchy facial hair, the acne, the book bags filled to capacity with gaming manuals and metal tins rattling with dice collections, the B.O., the nose laughter, the restless chatter. It was a collection of dorky teenagers and dorky old guys. And at the head of the table was an absolute giant of a man who was dressed as a pirate. Surprisingly, there was also one guy who actually looked kind of normal. He wore preppy clothes that fit well, and his hair was neatly gelled. The pirate called the group to order, and Super Guy let his head drop. Army hearties! This was most certainly not what he'd come to California to find. Welcome aboard the Quest Club. As the pirate announced the itinerary for the day, Super Guy identified a game that had space for new players. The normal-seeming guy was at that game, too. Everyone started getting settled when the dungeon master let them know he needed a little time before they got started. So he suggested everyone go grab lunch, and they would start playing at 12:30. Super Guy looked around the group a little bewildered. I'm new to California. I don't really know where to eat, he said uncertainly. The preppy guy jumped right in. No problem. None at all. The mall is right up the street. Can't miss it. And it's got the food court with just about anything. I like the Chinese lunch special. That's a pretty good deal. There's also California Pizza Kitchen on the next block, and that's kind of pricey, but their barbecue pizza is really good if you like barbecue pizza. Personally, I like Fuddruckers. If you've never been there, it's 2 blocks away, and they've got bottomless sodas, which I like. He was tall and thin, and he flapped his long arms with pronounced elbows all over the place as he spoke. With his gelled hair and his swoopy gestures, he looked like Mr. Fantastic from the Fantastic Four. The guy's name was Charles Galapagos, and he talked incessantly and somehow joyously. He normally gamed with his buddy Brett, but Brett had a job interview that day. Charles had just started playing in that game that week and was playing a mage because he loved playing mages because, well, look at him. He's obviously not the fighter type. He drank 5 glasses of cherry Coke in the 30 minutes that they sat there. As they were wrapping up their meal, Charles mentioned that he played volleyball. Yup. I love it. Every Monday. It's pretty far away, but it's a great game, so Brett and I drive up there every Monday night. There was a pause in the conversation as Super Guy tried to take that all in and make sense of it. If you'd like to come, you could, Charles said in response to the silence. Okay, Super Guy found himself saying. They went back and played. They sat next to each other, and they had a great time. After the game, Super Guy got Charles's address and directions to his house. Then that next night, Super Guy found himself climbing into the cramped back seat of Brett's sporty red Dodge Shadow. Actually, it was Charles's car, but Brett was apparently driving. Charles told me you guys dominated the game yesterday, Brett said, making eye contact with Super Guy through the rearview mirror. Brett was lean and fit. He had a skateboarder haircut and a long flop of blonde on top. Brett spoke with great enthusiasm, practically shouting out the words he wanted to emphasize. I want in for next Sunday's game. I am there, he said. Sweet, Super Guy answered. Then Brett threw the car into drive and they were off. This was 1993 Los Angeles at evening rush hour on the 5 freeway. At the on-ramp, they were met with 6 lanes of wall-to-wall traffic. Super Guy's heart sank. And then his jaw dropped and stayed dropped for the next 15 minutes. Super Guy considered himself an excellent driver, but what Brett was able to do behind the wheel was something else entirely. It wasn't showboating, and it wasn't scary in the least. It was simple mastery, unlike anything Super Guy had ever even known was possible. Brett's driving could only be described as art. It was like the traffic wasn't even there. The car became a ghost, floating right through solid objects, then a fish darting through kelp, squirting back and forth between the stationary cars and trucks, then a lion pouncing into an opening and charging full speed. As each individual lane expanded and contracted, Brett somehow found leeway and leverage to constantly propel the car forward. Charles managed the radio as they went. The two of them absolutely adored a station called KROQ, which blasted Radiohead, Blind Melon, and Pearl Jam, with snarky DJs vamping in between songs. After Super Guy finally collected himself, they broke into conversation. They talked about Dungeons and Dragons first. Standard stuff about favorite character types, clever spell use, near-death encounters with manticores, gnolls, and purple worms. Honestly, Super Guy would have never pegged either of them as D&D players, but they most certainly were. Brett and Charles took turns bragging about each other and reveling in some of their best shared moments at the gaming table. From there, they fell into more typical get-to-know-you conversation that was a little stilted until Super Guy told them about his former asshole landlord who happened to be the head of the local fire department. After going a week without heat, Super Guy started pulling fire alarms downtown in the middle of the night, so his landlord would have to wake up. By the time he told the story of the third fire alarm, where the fire engine crashed into a parked pizza delivery van, Super Guy had Brett and Charles breathless in hysterics. Volleyball was weird. Why on earth they drove all that way to play volleyball was baffling. It was a bizarre mix of people that all knew each other. 2 high school girls, a Latino man, a bulky alpha male named Ron, 4 folks who looked like bikers, a dorky older man in safety goggles. They played in a vast, empty gym set in a vast, empty space in the desert outside L.A. Super Guy stayed quiet, rotated positions as he was directed, and wondered what he'd gotten himself into. They all went out to an IHOP afterwards, and the group talked good-naturedly about the games they'd just played. After a bit, Charles picked up on Super Guy's quiet and leaned over. "What'd you think? Didn't know what you were getting into when you said you'd come, did you? Is it anything like volleyball in New York?" I never played except for high school gym class, really," Super Guy answered. Oh, no way. You were really good. And this is a tough crowd. They know the game. Yep, they do. So if you weren't okay, they'd have told me already. For sure. No, you were good. Charles, I've been wondering about something all night, Super Guy responded. Can I ask you a question? Anything. Ask. Of course, anything. How did you even find this place? It's 90 minutes from your house. Charles used to live up here, Brett chimed in. Yup, I did. The high desert, but I left. Oh, man, did I ever. 0 jobs, Charles said. Like, none, Brett added. They opened the In-N-Out Burger and got 3,000 applications the first day. The two nodded along with each other. It was like one brain telling a story out of 2 bodies. The drive home was completely different. It was almost 11 o'clock, and the highway was entirely empty up in the desert. There were no lights anywhere, and it was chilly. Charles put the radio to a more mellow station. Super Guy sat in the back seat thinking over the experience. It had been pretty fun, but this bizarro volleyball cult was definitely not what he was after. But he'd probably keep playing D&D on Sundays, at least for now. Oh, wow, I love this song, Charles yelled, breaking up Super Guy's thoughts. Charles turned the volume up. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do-duh. Super Guy knew the song. It was Tom's Diner by Suzanne Vega, but he'd only heard it as an original a cappella song. But now, some brilliant L.A. lunatic had put a techno thump beat underneath it. Do-do-do-do, thump-da-doo, thump-do-do-do, thump-do-do-do, ka-thump-thump. Super Guy's head started bobbing with the beat. Charles's knobby limbs floated into the air and swayed along. Then the car came onto a long, flat bridge built with seams every 100 feet or so. Brett started swaying the wheel ever so slightly, back and forth with each seam, perfectly in sync with the music until the car itself was bobbing to the beat. Do-do-do-do, thump-da-doo-doo, thump-doo-doo-doo, thump-da-doo, thump-thump. The lyric of the first verse started. Charles turned it up again, and suddenly they were all singing along, smiling, swaying, laughing out loud, flapping like imbeciles. It was a Monday night, headed back into a city where image was king, with the three of them car dancing in a manner that was anything but cool.
I look up at the ivy, scale the schoolhouse walls. I look over at the co-eds, who I looking down at my overalls. 'Cause I'm just a farmer, well, a simple farmer, living in this Ivy League town. I'm just a farmer, well, a simple farmer, 'cause I buy my books by the pound. I have 2 majors, and 3 minors. You may think I'm kinda gauche. They are agribusiness, physical education, econ, psych and soc. I'm just a farmer, well, a simple farmer, living in this Ivy League town. I'm just a farmer, well, a simple farmer, 'cause I buy my books by the pound. a tractor, to all my classes. I'd park it right outside the door. With one teacher and 300 students, it's no wonder that I snore. I'm just a farmer, well, a simple farmer living in this Ivy League town. I'm just a farmer, well, a simple farmer, 'cause I buy my books by the pound.
He buys his books by the pound. He buys his books by the pound. He buys his books by the pound.
Howdy, man.
He buys his books by the pound.
Looks like rain, don't it?
He buys his books by the pound.
What's your major?
He buys his books by the pound.
Well, pardon me for saying so, man, but Kant's notion of a moral imperative is simply impossible in metaphysical paradigm.
Shoot